يلا.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this significant webinar hosted by the Arab Organization for Human Rights in the UK, titled Siege and Starvation in Al-Fasher, Mercenaries and War Crimes in Sudan. The siege of Al-Fasher has cut off major roads and aid, leaving hundreds of thousands at risk of starvation. The World Food Programme says food prices are 5 times higher than elsewhere in Sudan, with families surviving on animal fodder. Sudan's government accused the UAE of recruiting foreign mercenaries, reportedly including 80 Colombians, to fight with the RSF. The conflict has already killed tens of thousands and displaced millions. In response to this dire humanitarian crisis and the escalating war crimes, Arab Organization for Human Rights in the UK is hosting this webinar to expose the severity of the catastrophe and call for accountability. Leading experts and practitioners who work on Sudan will share their analysis and experiences. Today's discussion points will be 4 points. First, the RSF siege of Al-Fasher and its humanitarian consequences, including surging food prices and widespread acute malnutrition among children. Second, the use of foreign mercenaries, particularly Colombians financed by external actors, and their involvement in war crimes. Third, the obstruction of humanitarian aid and the global indifference to mass suffering. Number 4, mechanisms for international accountability and protecting civilians in Sudan. We are honored today to be joined by a distinguished panel of speakers. First, Mr. Endre Stiansen, former Norwegian ambassador to the Sudan. Mr. Timothy Michael Carney, former U.S. ambassador to Sudan. Dr. Mohammed Ibrahim, Director of Strategic Planning at the Sudanese Ministry of Health. Gaye, former Ecowas Director of Communications. Patson, Malisa, International Relations Advisor. Mr. Martin Plaut, former BBC Africa Editor. And Mrs. Aicha Elbasri, former United Nations official. And lastly, Leni Kienzle, WFP spokesperson. Hello? Leni Kienzle, WFP spokesperson in Sudan. As Khulud told everybody that each speaker will have 5 to 7 minutes to present their insight and testimony, and after all speakers have finished their presentation, if time permits, we will have a discussion session lasting no more than 20 minutes. During this session, speakers can add their thoughts and comments on their speakers' contributions. At the end of the webinar, every speaker will have like a 1 minute to provide final words and conclusion. Let's start right away, and we give the floor first to Mr. Timothy. Mr. Timothy Michael Carney, former U.S. ambassador to Sudan. Mr. Timothy, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. The first thing I would like to do is urge the prohibition of using the word genocide when it comes to Sudan. It is, in my view, a grievous error to use a word of such enormous impact and weight. And to my mind, genocide means you must act against it. What is happening in Sudan is not, in my view, genocide. Ethnic cleansing at the very least, murder, rape, untrammeled violence, for sure. And yes, that must be dealt with. It must be subject of the accountability, sir, that you mentioned in your introduction. Now, if we look at the humanitarian situation, what are the possibilities about making some kind of an arrangement between the Sudan Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces to get convoys in? Well, we saw the last convoy that went in was grievously attacked with trucks burned and people killed. I'm wondering, and I put this very tentatively, it's been a long time since I was in Al-Fasher, I believe 2005, maybe 2004, but I believe there's a large stadium in Al-Fasher. And taking a leaf out of the book of Operation Lifeline Sudan, in which the WFP airdropped food into the south of Sudan during the civil war. I wonder if it would be possible to airdrop supplies into the area of such a stadium. The problem is if you do it with low-flying aircraft and you kick the parcels out, you risk to hurt people, you risk to damage people, and you become vulnerable to anti-aircraft fire from the surrounding rapid support forces. I just throw that out as a matter of possible discussion. Now, as for a solution, and that's where we need to go, we need to get some kind of a solution that would include accountability, that would include how to deal with the militaries, that will include probably the exile of the most heinous figures involved in this activity. The deal would have to include the Emirates. There's a problem with the Emirates. Clearly, a very senior figure in the Emirates, at least one, perhaps a group of them, decided to make their bed with Hemeti and the RSF because either of gold or because of the possibility that RSF control would open the Port Sudan area to Emirates activity. I don't know. They were wrong. They were grievously wrong. And it is up to the Arab world, it seems to me, the Muslim and Arab world, to bring to the Emirates the reality that they're on, as the British would say, the wrong wicket. So I would argue that those two elements are a good way to start with a solution to the immediate and the long-term problems in Sudan today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carney. And now we give the floor to Mr. Endre Stiansen, former Norwegian ambassador to the Sudan. Mr. Stiansen.
Can you hear me now? I think I was muted. Now, thank you very much
Now we
for
can hear you.
yeah.
Please.
Thank you very much for the invitation to join this webinar. I said yes immediately because I think it's so important to draw attention, as much attention we can, to the situation in Darfur specifically, but also the situation in Sudan. While I'm former ambassador to Sudan, I am the current Norwegian special envoy to the Horn of Africa, where Sudan and South Sudan, for historical reasons, are our two priority countries. So this is an issue that I'm working with every day. And I want to say two things first, and then I'll repeat it at the end. The first thing is that nothing of what we are talking about, access, humanitarian assistance and so on, nothing can be done properly, efficiently, while the war is ongoing. So focusing on stopping the war must be the priority, and it's not just the war in Darfur, the war in Sudan. That's the priority. Unfortunately, it'll take time to get there because I don't think we'll have a ceasefire before we see the contours of a political solution. So Norway is working very hard on the political front. We have less to value to add to the ceasefire negotiations, even though we, of course, are very supportive of this. The second point I want to make is that the suffering that we are now seeing in Darfur, as well as in other parts of Sudan, they are man-made. They are man-made. This didn't need to happen. I was in Sudan when the war broke out. You know, it was a peaceful morning. We had indications that things were moving okay on the political front, and then something happened. Now we need to investigate more what that something was. But my point is, this was a war that was deliberate. It was not just an accident, it was deliberate. Now, We all know the situation in Sudan is the world's largest displacement crisis. It's more people starving than anywhere else in the world, and we have a growing a number of areas where there is real famine, which means that people are dying. They're dying as we speak, and they will be dying in the day after, and the day after that. And there are also shocking reports of abuse of civilians, killings, rape, violence, looting, torching. You name it, it's happening now before our eyes, and we're not able to stop it. Norway has been very clear from the outset. We want to see an immediate ceasefire and an inclusive political process towards a sustainable peace and democratic transition. A inclusive political process towards a new democratic transition. We think that is the only way to stop the war properly and keep the country together. If the country is not kept together, the war will be ongoing, and similar to the war in the South for 20 years, maybe possibly longer. We also believe very strongly it's a principle that all Sudanese civilians have the same right to humanitarian assistance wherever they are, and of course, especially in the areas where they are suffering the most now. This is a Fasher and other areas in Darfur now. So that must be our priority. We also believe that the UN should urgently be able to obtain permission to establish permanent presences in Darfur so that they can deliver humanitarian assistance at scale where it's most needed. This is critical, and unfortunately we're struggling with that. There are reasons for this, why it's difficult, but it needs to happen because that's the only way we can help the population where they are. We also believe very strongly that all parties, all armed actors, have a responsibility to protect civilians, and they must provide for humanitarian access. There's a lot of hot air around on this issue because people are using, we think, false arguments to prevent access for bona fide humanitarian actors, the UN as well as other people. None of this can wait. None of it can wait. And as humans, fellow humans, as signatories to the Geneva Convention, we believe that we are obliged to act to protect, save lives. So we're working on this day in and day out, unfortunately with good partners in the region and elsewhere. And we are not going to stay idle. We're going to speak out when we see famine happening, and we're going to speak out when we see food used as weaponized, used as an instrument of war. We have called for repeatedly that the RSF must immediately implement UN Security Council Resolution 2736 and lift the siege of Fasher. We are in contact with them on this issue, and we are repeating this call now. We are also condemning repeatedly the attacks on humanitarian convoys, most recently the one on the World Food Programme convoy that was on en route to the Malit last week, and we've done it also earlier in the year. No, earlier in the summer when we had other incidents of a similar nature. We also believe very strongly that there should be no impunity for the violations of international humanitarian law. The role of mercenary has been addressed. Of course, should be no place for mercenary in this. This is wrong, and it should be addressed. And those who are embedding it must be held accountable. One way to do better moving forward to hold people accountable is to renew the mandate of the UN fact-finding mission. Ideally, for 2 years, it will be decided in the Human Rights Council in October this year, very soon. It needs to be there to be able to collect evidence and investigate potential abuses so that the perpetrators can be held accountable, and also to defer further crimes. We hope that everybody, including Sudanese authorities, will see the benefit of this as an independent third party to investigate crimes, and hope that it will be renewed. Certainly, we with like-minded is pushing for that very soon. Now, specifically on the situation in Fasher, I spoke to people earlier today. It's desperate. People are dying. They're seeing family members dying. It's desperate. However, I want to add on this. The famine condition, the war, is man-made. Since it's man-made, it's possible to deal with it. We can stop the flow of arms. That will go a long way. We can have a ceasefire. Ceasefire, as I said, depend on a political settlement, at least the contours of a political settlement. That is something that is possible to produce if there's will enough to do it. So it's extremely important not to lose hope, not to say that it's impossible, because it is possible. And finally, what I'm always saying, because the people of Sudan, the people of Darfur, the people of Fasher have not given up, we cannot give up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stiansen, for this precious input. And now we give the floor to Ms. Aicha Elbasri, researcher at the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies in Doha, and former spokeswoman for the UN African Mission in Darfur, UNAMID. Mrs. Aicha, you may have the floor now. Can you turn on the mic? Can you unmute?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for convening this meeting. There's a big need for discussion, especially that not only Darfur, but the whole Sudan has gone under the radar for so long. I have 5 points for the 5 minutes, 5 points to make, and I'll try to be as brief as possible. The first point I would like to make is regarding the situation, the siege of Al-Fasher and the situation in Darfur in general, it cannot be discussed and understood, analyzed, unless it's put in the context of Sudan and the context of the region as well. So an important point I would like to stress is that any assessment of the situation should keep in mind that both sides, the SAF and the RSF, have carried out actually massacres of civilians, and they have both targeted humanitarian aid and aid workers. There's no doubt that the RSF is more responsible for the siege and starving the population, but the SAF is not innocent either. So this should come, of course, as no surprise to anyone, given the long record of the human rights abuses of the SAF and its militias, including the RSF. And also, we need to keep in mind that the situation in Al-Fasher must be understood in the context of the looming danger of state disintegration. The RSF, as you know, is attempting to establish a parallel government in Darfur, while we're witnessing a gradual dismantling of state central authority and an eroding national sovereignty. These are very important to any way of dealing with this situation. The second point, the Al-Fasher crisis also reflects a wider crisis of multilateralism in a shifting international order. We wouldn't be we wouldn't be complaining about the silence around Darfur and Sudan in general if this situation in the world today was different, because international organizations, including the UN and the UN Security Council in particular, have unfortunately lost much of their political weight in this age of great power competition. So calling for UN intervention, as many have been doing recently, looks, of course it's ideal, but unrealistic, especially since Sudan has slipped down the priority list for major powers that are focused on other conflicts, be it Ukraine, China, US competition, or Gaza. There are many conflicts around the world, and unfortunately, Sudan is not on the list, not on the priority list at least. So the UN has been unfortunately reduced to a limited humanitarian role that itself depends on the will of the powerful states. That's also a major point that needs to be taken into consideration. Thirdly, there have been many mediation initiatives, such as the Jeddah talks or IGAD, but they have failed to secure a lasting ceasefire for many reasons that we don't have time to address. But meanwhile, the Troika, including, of course, the UK, US, and Norway, no longer seem relevant for Sudan for many reasons as well, especially given the deep aid cuts by the US and other initiatives. We've seen recently the London conference unable also to, the conference, of course, on Sudan, unable to secure even a joint statement or agreements due to many divisions. The fifth point, and this is what I would like to go with the way forward, the last point, we need to ask who are the main sponsors of this war and who can pressure them to stop fueling it. So as we know, there are several countries backing the Sudanese armed forces, mostly, of course, Egypt, Iran, Turkey, amongst others, while the RSF has been mainly receiving support from the Emirates, as well as Libya actors, and a network across the Sahel. So there are still three major states in particular that hold decisive financial, military, and political leverage. And I'm talking here about Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. So if these states, if they're mobilized, they could play a key role in ending the civil war, preventing Sudan from collapsing, and of course, ending the siege in Al-Fasher. So this takes us to the question, who can pressure them to take this role? In my view, there's only one major power today with that capacity. It's the US, including under the Trump administration. So far, unfortunately, we've seen the US giving less attention as required to Sudan's war, and despite the serious risk, but the US has some strong foundations that it can build on. First, Trump and his administration have emphasized ending global conflicts with the US mediation in Ukraine. We're hoping that it will succeed. It has played a role in Rwanda agreements, in Armenia and Azerbaijan conflict. So showcasing American influence is crucial to countering China. So I think it can do it. The administration has shown interest also in Africa, hosting summits and brokering peace deals. Sudan has already been identified as a next mediation priority. And the Trump administration does not need to start from zero, from scratch. It can build on the recent Quad for Sudan initiative, which gained momentum in June when Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and UAE met with the US Deputy Secretary of State, Christopher Orlando, and Senior Advisor of Africa, Mr. Boulos. This format could continue. It could also be combined with Jeddah Talk or Jeddah Track, and later be expanded to IGAD and probably other actors. Whatever format is chosen, I believe the Trump administration has the capability of pressuring SAF and RSF through the Gulf Quad members to sit down and work out a deal that guarantees a civilian government. It is very difficult, but not impossible. This way forward would not only save Fasher and Darfur, but Sudan as a whole before it's too late. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Aicha, for this input. And now we move to Mr. Adama Gaye, former Ecowas Director of Communication. Mr. Adama.
Can you see me?
We can see
Hello,
you.
everybody. Can you hear me?
Hello.
Thank you for having me. I salute everybody. Yesterday, when I got the invitation to join this webinar, I said immediately, yes. I'm sorry, but even without having in-depth knowledge of what was going to be discussed, but I know it was about Sudan. Immediately, thinking loud. What came back to me, to my memory, was toward the end of the 1980s, around 1988, 1989, in Washington, D.C., at the U.S. Congress. I had the opportunity then to meet the then leader of the Sudanese People's Liberation Army, John Garang. He was there with one of his close friend and ally, Mickey Leland. And I did an interview that was carried then of John Garang in Jeune Afrique. And it was clear what was the reason why the South Sudanese people wanted to fight at that time, to have their autonomy, their independence, at least to have their belief in religion heard and respected. In Sudan, where more people have been killed than the time of the Garang era, nobody is talking about this situation in Sudan. So this brings to me the belief that the first thing that should be done is to raise interest, momentum, and attention about Sudan. How does this should be done? First step in my mind is maybe really, instead of just allowing African conflicts to be now dislodged and discussed in far-flung areas like United Emirates Arab nations or Saudi Arabia, even the USA, I think Africa should own this conflict. And this is something that the African Union should take and make it as a center stage topic it has to address. I don't know if there has been an African Union specific conference on Sudan, but this should be maybe the first stage, because African Union said under the 2013 Agenda 2063 of Africa that the guns should be silenced around 2020. We are now 2025. And Sudan is the strongest case with East African area of DRC, Rwanda, you name them, are the areas where you really hear louder the guns. So taking Sudan as a case point to discuss it and bring those stakeholders I've heard being mentioned, whether you, the Arabs, whether you take the Americans, Mr. Trump, who is very, somebody who likes to own big things, most likely could be a player in this, and other players from China that used to be very influential, including in in natural resources in Sudan, could be brought in. Recall in 2008, when also the international community and civilian society intervened in the Darfur crisis by threatening to call on the boycott of the Olympics that were to be held in Beijing. So I think we need to bring the stakeholders and raise the profile of this conflict. Bob Geldof did that in 1986 with the famine in Ethiopia. Today, with the age of internet, with the age of information that can be quick, with the age of netizens and influencers, bringing people from Africa to discuss it and put it on the platform. Like yesterday, what happened in Gaza. I was supposed to talk on Al Jazeera about the Supreme Court's decision in Mali to discuss the dissolution of political parties. But when 6 journalists were killed and an hospital was asked, it became the global news, breaking news, and CNN had to cancel the conversation I've had. I know CNN wants to, Al Jazeera discuss a lot about Sudan, but there is an effort that needs to be done, of course, with the help of countries like Norway. I respect very much Norway as a key partner of Africa in good and bad times, to bring those influencers and civil societies to make sure that we bring this topic in the discussions that are happening now in Africa. And this can be also somehow, if the African Union is really serious on the margin of the United Nations Summit next month, and bringing, that would be easier to do that, players within the Trump administration and other international players with the help of Norway once more and the African Union, so that this thing becomes a conflict that Africa will own and promote. Last but not the least, Sudan is one thing, DRC is another, but the reality is that overall Africa, when it comes to rule of law and democracy, anybody who wants to talk about Sudan or any other issues must also discuss the challenges of the recession in the on the democratic front, rule of law. As I'm talking to you, I am a political exile. I cannot go back to Senegal, which is considered a model. I was refugee back, I was jailed. I wrote a book was state, published in Paris. And I'm just saying that we talk about the African Union playing a role. We can talk about Sudan with the help of the civil society and international stakeholders, but we need to bring the voices that will be able to speak loud, clear, in a decisive and sometimes a contradictory way. I want to say a last message. 2 years ago in Kenya, I was invited to participate to the what is called CODA, the Coalition for the Development of Africa. And we were with a group of influential people, 20 people, including the former vice president of Nigeria, academics, etc. But there was in the room also one gentleman whom I knew when he used to be at the UN Commission for Africa, Mr. Abdullah Hamdok, who became prime minister in Sudan when the conflict started. And I could see the person arrogant, unwilling to allow anybody whose thinking could be seen as iconoclastic like mine or other people. So if you ask way or any players that want to win, you should not allow those people to dictate the terms of the conversation. I thank you very much. I just spoke in a way that came to my mind, but I think Africans should own their own problem and not expect anybody else to fix it without themselves being totally involved and serious, rigorous about fixing them. Thank you.
Sure.
And those who invited me, I appreciated your invitation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gaye. And now we give the floor to Leni Kienzle, WFP spokesperson in Sudan. Leni.
Thank you very much. So I will just give a brief overview of the humanitarian situation. Across Sudan, 25 million people at least are facing acute hunger, according to the Integrated Phase Classification Assessment, which was issued in December of 2024. And since then, there has not been an updated assessment because the government has withdrawn from the IPC process. So what that means is that it's the number of people who are facing acute hunger is likely much higher today than it was 8-9 months ago. And in that same assessment, famine was confirmed in areas surrounding El-Fasher, and it had first been confirmed in Zamzam camp, which is around 13 kilometers southeast of El-Fasher. So looking at the situation now, it is very likely that famine conditions are prevalent in El-Fasher. And the reports that we are receiving from El-Fasher itself is absolutely catastrophic and harrowing. We're receiving reports of people dying of hunger, resorting to eating animal feed. It is called ombaz in Sudan, which is a type of food waste left over from the creation of peanut oil. So it's basically peanut shells crushed together that are usually used to feed animals, which people are now surviving off of and even paying for to have just even that. Many community kitchens that have been a lifeline for people in Al-Fasher are no longer functioning, and it has been nearly impossible to get any assistance into the city, any nutrition and food supplies, as has been mentioned by a couple panelists. Our attempts to reach Al-Fasher have so far been unsuccessful because a convoy that was headed there on the 3rd of June was attacked just 80 kilometers outside of the city, and 5 humanitarian personnel on that convoy were killed and several trucks destroyed. And again, most recently, a convoy going to Malit in North Darfur was also attacked and 3 trucks were destroyed. So we are operating in an environment where we are under attack. And it's absolutely of critical concern that there is a humanitarian pause, that the situation and the siege in Al-Fasher is lifted as quickly as possible so that we can get assistance in. We do have a convoy that is ready to go and proceed into the city in Niala, which is around 300 kilometers away from Al-Fasher, as soon as a humanitarian pause would be agreed upon. So far from the Sudanese Armed Forces / Sudan's Humanitarian Aid Commission, we have gotten the clearances to be able to move into Al-Fasher. However, the RSF has yet to support, has yet to communicate or agree to a humanitarian pause for the besieged city of Al-Fasher. I'd also like to point out that we are also extremely concerned about the situation in Kadugli in South Kordofan, where the conditions from the reports that we have are very similar, as it is also besieged, but is not as prevalently reported on in the media and talked about as much as Al-Fasher is, but we are gravely concerned about the situation there as well. So that's just a brief humanitarian overview of the situation, and I will be happy to answer any questions after the presentations of other panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leni. WFP is very crucial stance now about what's happening in Sudan. And now we move to Mr. Martin Plaut. Mr. Martin Plaut is the former BBC Africa editor. Mr. Martin Plaut, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much. And, you know, as the old saying goes, blessed are the peacekeepers. And I wish everybody that is attempting to end the conflict in Sudan every success. But let me be pessimistic about it, because I think there's no point in being unrealistic about what is going on. I mean, if Mr. Stiansen can manage to achieve what he is attempting to do, then I would be the first to cheer. But I mean, you know, the words like, you know, this is an African problem, must be solved by Africa is, I'm afraid, doesn't bear looking at. Who remembers the Africa standby brigades, on which huge sums of money and training effort were put in place to try and halt these kind of activities? Can you remember when they were last deployed? I don't think they even exist. So I think Africa is not a way forward. The Trump administration, I see little indication that they have any interest in getting involved in Sudan. After all, they are perfectly happy to tolerate the appalling situation in Gaza, whatever they say about it. And if you look at Ukraine, I mean, how many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people have already died? And President Trump is perfectly happy, as far as I can see, to tolerate what President Putin is doing. And although he keeps talking about sanctions, they never arrive. So I think we have to be realistic about what is happening. The war in Sudan is, in the end, continuing because it reflects real situations of outside actors like the UAE, and of course other actors that haven't been mentioned yet. But let me just put the other question that is always on the table, which is the deep divide between the people that live along the Nile and the people that live in the periphery. And that is behind a lot of the things that go on. And if one looks at where the RSF comes from, part of it comes out of the brigades which were established by Gaddafi many, many years ago, which still had reverberations in Chad and in Libya. And we haven't mentioned General Haftar and his role in supporting the RSF. We have talked about the UAE and how they are flying in assistance, support, and medical activity, sometimes through Uganda as well. And they are bolstering the role of the RSF. And there seems to be no interest in ending that. And I think we have to just be realistic about where that is. The other actor that had a big role in the past, but has been more complex recently, was the Wagner Group with the Russians, although the Africa Corps is still involved. And, a lot of the gold that was mined in Sudan was eventually going back to Russia and paying for the Ukrainian war effort. And, these are the things that are behind the scenes. Everybody knows about them. But until you deal with these things, there is really little opportunity of reaching a concrete path to peace. So my view is that this is highly likely to just continue. The suffering will continue. The starvation that Leni has so admirably described will continue. And if you want to see what the world community is prepared to do and prepared to accept, including the African Union, look at what happened in the situation in Tigray, where between 400 and 600,000 people died, and no journalist was allowed to go into it. The Ethiopians tolerated it. In fact, they pushed it. Their troops, the Eritrean troops, attempted to crush the life out of the Tigrayans. Did anybody get involved? There were lots of kind words, but there was no action. And I'm afraid that is the most likely scenario that we are going to see in Sudan. It is not high enough up anybody's priority list, certainly not President Trump's, to get involved in the way that Aicha correctly pointed out. And I fully agree with her. The only person who could really do something about it is President Trump. I see no interest in him getting involved in that. You will remember how he described African countries in an appalling way, which I will not repeat. But that is his attitude towards them. Why would he waste his time, money, and troops in really pushing this on, especially when the UAE is quite capable of bribing him, quite frankly, and has done so in the past. So, I'm sorry, but I wish the peacemakers every success. I think that they have an uphill battle, and I think there's little likelihood of this being resolved rapidly. If it is, I would be the first to say thank goodness. But I think that we are likely to see more suffering, more conflict, more war, and more deaths. And I think that is where we are actually at. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin Plaut. Now, Mr. Patson, Malisa. Mr. Patson, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Program Director, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I joined the call of the members of the Progressive World in agitating for the relief to the destabilization and humanitarian crisis that is currently underway in the city of Fasher, as well as Sudan at large. In a situation as dire as this, where the decent, humane seem to be a distant anomaly, it is required of us to all restore the prospect of a peaceful dialogue, as well as a dignified life for the people of Sudan. As is being relayed in the presentations of my fellow colleagues, the humanitarian toll on the innocent women and children is now one person too many. The revival of the valuation of one life as too precious to leave to casualty is therefore a matter of decency and also a moral fiber of the international community at large. Furthermore, the deprivation of access to relief by bodies that are tasked with serving the internally displaced and indigent contravenes conventions governing international law, human rights, and prevention of ethnic cleansing. The participation of foreign actors through armed sponsorship and mercenary intervention escalates this crisis to the urgent and frank identification of this conflict as an international atrocity. Under such circumstances, quiet diplomacy cannot trump the need to urgently save lives and their right to live in peace and dignity. It is therefore imperative that all well-meaning voices in the multilateral community raise the matter of the war in Sudan as a conflict that cannot be allowed to last a day more than is necessary. While this does not guarantee an immediate end to all hostilities between warring parties, it does place the perpetrators of war crimes on notice that the world is indeed watching, and that the means of international justice are not a mere distant echo. Peer-to-peer dialogue at political level, along with incorporation of civil society engagement and testimony, ought to be encouraged and fostered through the engagement of the various multilateral bodies that Sudan is a member to, whether this be the United Nations, the African Union, or the Intergovernmental Authority on Development. Each body cannot leave the task of alleviating the suffering of the people of Sudan to chance. Let each one of us therefore ignite the means at our disposal to ensure that the instruments of which Sudan is party to are activated to their full potentials so as to instigate an urgent peace in the country, and further adequately record the toll of the conflict for the sake of humanitarian relief as the primary outcome, and also ensure justice for the victims of this tragic period. Sudan is a key member of the international community, whether by virtue of its geolocation or its natural resources. A peaceful and stable Sudan is more profitable for its partners and allies than it could be in a state of fragmentation. With this, I therefore echo the call to urgent peace and dignity for all in Sudan, and especially for the sake of all who are suffering in the city of Fasher. I think it's also important that I add that in a situation like this, as you've been hearing from the various speakers, there is a very easy pendulum swing from pure despondence to earnest optimism. It is so important that in a moment like this, balance be key. So as balance entails, let us all ensure that the ultimate aim is to remember that this is more than simply politics. It's more than simply geolocation issues. It's people, it's humans, it's children, it's women. With that, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Malisa. And now, since all our honorable guests have already made their comments and insights, now I have a question for all of you, but mainly and specifically for the ambassador, Mr. Carney and Mr. Stiansen. I mean, it's all of you, basically. When discussing Sudan, we cannot ignore the mercenary file. Sudanese authorities accuse the UAE of recruiting and financing more than 80 Colombian fighters in El-Fasher, and President Gustavo Petro himself condemned this practice after dozens of Colombians were killed, calling it a crime against humanity. Now, how should such a state-sponsored recruitment be viewed under international law, and what accountability mechanisms exist to address it? Who wants to start?
Let me take a first crack at it, if I may. The answer is I don't know what legal aspects are relevant. I suspect you'll recall that there are any number of individuals, various countries engaged in Ukraine, and no one seems, except of course the Russians, seem to have any problem with that. We do not know, as far as I am aware, what the terms were under which these Colombians took service through the United Arab Emirates with the Rapid Support Forces. That's something for an investigation to open on. And I believe there were, the Colombian authorities have said they will be investigating that. And my guess is that there are survivors of the plane that was destroyed with a number of mercenaries killed. And thus the initial object has to be an investigation into who were they, who did they take employment with, what were the terms of that employment, and then you can go on to looking at the legalities and the possible sanctions as a result. Mr. Ambassador, you might have, Endre, you may have a rather more sensible set of replies.
Thank you very much,
Yeah,
Mr. Chairman. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think you made a very good start. Let me just make 2 points on this. The use of mercenaries in this war, of course, is well known. And it's not only, Colombia is not the only country that comes up. South Sudan, Chad, CAR, Mali, and so on and so forth. There's a large number where, allegedly recruited deliberately by the RSF, supported by others. All of this is going to be hearsay, accusations, and so on until there's proper investigation, as Ambassador Carney already was saying, which is why I highlighted the issue, the importance of the fact-finding mission. It's obvious that this is something that they can and need to support, but then the mandate has to be renewed, ideally for 2 years, and they must then be giving access. We believe very strongly that this is also in the interest of the government of Sudan, the authorities, on the ground, wherever they are, so that we can get the facts, so that we can follow up with the provisions that are established in international criminal law, as well as in other appropriate legal instruments that are available to us. But nothing will move beyond accusations until it is established, as a fact, and it's the fact-finding mission that can most appropriately do that. We don't, in any way support. We've been warning against this, the regionalization of the war and so on, from day one. But it's important to be addressed, and there's a way to deal with it. I would like to, though, to return to some of the things that were said by other participants earlier. So, if you don't mind, I would like to pick up on a few things.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, it's very easy in this situation to become pessimistic, despondent, and then just almost like giving up. I understand that, and I know every single day, I'm fighting with this, in the obstacles. However, it's not my job, it's not my assignment to give up on this. It's my job to do something about it, which is why we have a very active diplomacy towards countries in the region, be it in the Gulf, neighboring countries to Sudan, as well as further afield, including with the US. And we have concrete proposals that we are discussing with them to be able to start step by step dealing with it. One of the things we are working on concretely is to link talks about ceasefire and a political process. We believe this is essential to move forward. We are also, with partners, working on the access issue. It should be a non-issue, access. However, it is a problem. We have to do it. I believe, there's a lot being said about the US administration. And our point has always been to work with the Americans on concrete solutions is good. It can, because they are, as was said, the major superpower now. They have leverage in all quarters, and they can be a force for good. And being a force for good in this context is also good for America. A destabilized Sudan is not good for everybody. And as Aicha was saying earlier, the trajectory now is for a divided country. A divided country means a forever war. Nobody wants to see that. Second, the divided country means a continuous outflow of migrants from the Sudan, and with all the horrors that are part of that. I saw a message before I got on, started this, where 3 sisters had drowned in the Mediterranean, just a day ago. It's terrible. This will continue to grow unless we are dealing with this crisis. And a destabilized Sudan, divided Sudan, will impact negatively on countries in the region. Close, small countries, close, big countries. Ethiopia, Egypt, and so on and so forth. The fact that there were drone attacks in Port Sudan shows that it's beyond, just the domestic issue. Immediately for Norway, that's a serious issue because of our shipping interests. We have to act, and we have to act on the basis of a realistic approach. I believe we have that. We have to work with the region, African Union especially, but also other countries. And we cannot take a defeatist approach to this. We have to try to do it. And again, I want to go back there, and I really like the last intervention by Patson. There's a moral dimension to it also. That's imperative, and we have to act on it. But it's good for us to solve this crisis, and the sooner the better. A forever war is not in anybody's interest, and it should be avoided at any cost. It may sound naive, but it's not impossible.
Thank you very much, Mr.
I would like to jump
Stiansen.
in, if possible.
Yeah, Aicha, sorry?
Yeah, I would like to jump in.
Please do.
Okay. Well, I would like to pick up on a few points regarding the question about the mercenaries, the Colombian mercenaries. It's so important to document all human rights abuses and violations, and there are so many. But I'm afraid that right now, the structures for the rule of law at the international level are not working. The ICC, especially on the case of Sudan, has not moved forward because of the crisis that not only international law, but human rights, the democracy, all the value-related system are being challenged during this shift in world order, or probably better expression is disorder. So right now, I wouldn't say that the priority shouldn't be on the accountability. It definitely should, but it's not realistic really to get anything in the immediate terms. So priority should definitely be given to the political process. And I totally agree with Ambassador Stiansen that we shouldn't be defeatist. We shouldn't be pessimistic about the situation. There are opportunities. And the reason I mention the Quad initiative, it's not because it looks nice on the paper, it's because it is a process that has already been started. And I don't know if Mr. Plaut has been following the news, but there was a scheduled meeting, a major scheduled meeting on 30th of July, 2025, which has been canceled. But there are many reports, including Bloomberg reports, that says that it was only postponed actually due to some disagreements over the process, or probably the wording of the joint statement that was supposed to come out, over especially disagreements over the SAF or the RSF, whether they should play a dominant role in a post-war transitional government. There were issues, the disagreements were about the role of these two players in the post-war situation, but there were disagreements also around the power sharing. So it's usually issues of power sharing and wealth sharing. But the Quad process is there. And I would like also to argue against the fact that Trump administration has no interest. I don't think so. The Trump administration that we have right now is taking a different take on Africa from the previous term, and we have seen it with the meeting convened with some states of the West Africa, Sahel, West Africa, Atlantic nations. We've seen it with other initiatives regarding the Rwanda DRC, and the process of Quad. And of course, the reason is not altruistic. It's not for the only benefits of Sudan, but for the benefits of the US. The US had lots of interest in Sudan, including geopolitical ones. Let's not forget that there is a competition with China and Russia, and there's also a role Iran that is growing on the Red Sea. And Washington has always been interested in having that part of the world under control. So in addition to that, there are minerals, there are issue of minerals, gold, wealth, well over there, but also the problem, the risk of spillover of the war in Sudan to the Horn of Africa. So there are some concrete interests for the US that have been behind the Quad initiatives. So I'm still hopeful. I think I would like to see Norway that has been active in the file of Sudan. I have to reckon, and I would like to see it pushing more, lobbying more for getting this meeting. I heard that there is a meeting scheduled for the Quad on September. If that process could go forward, there should be some hope, of course. A third point that I would like to touch on briefly is on the African solutions for African problems. It's a nice slogan. It hasn't always worked, unfortunately. I'm just afraid that the African Union is too weak to make a major difference that would make a difference for Sudan and in the civil war and saving the state of Sudan. And let me just remind Mr. Adama Gaye of the position of the African Union towards the ICC. It stood behind Sudan, the government of Elbasri, against the accountability in ICC. It stood also with the government of Sudan when it was assaulting the peacekeepers in the African mission in Darfur. The same with UNAMID, and I was witness to deadly attacks from the government of Sudan and its militias against the peacekeepers, and the African Union didn't make any move to denounce it or even to acknowledge the situation. IGAD right now, I think it lost its credibility with Kenya, supporting the project of the disintegration of Sudan with the RSF plan of parallel governments. There are other countries in IGAD that also have lost credibility. So I'm afraid, I'm not saying that the African actors are not interested and should not play a role, but to put them in the driver's seat, I don't think it's realistic. And I will stop right here, and probably I will come back later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aicha. And since Ambassador Stiansen have another commitments, so we might need to leave early. And could you kindly could you kindly share with us a final message before you go? Of course, we would like to have you more than that, but if you have final message before you leave.
Yeah, thank you so much, and apologies for having to leave early. It's actually relating to what a point I wanted to make. Aicha, you asked us to do lobbying. We do better than lobbying. We do better than lobbying. We can take initiative, and we have excellent relations in the region, in Sudan and internationally, and we're using that to the best of our ability. We don't necessarily go public with that. We are working very strategically, and we are not in the business of being overcome by pessimism. If then, there was no point. We share the analysis, the sober analysis, but we act as well. I want to repeat, one very important point. Yes, the people is suffering. They're suffering terribly. We all know what is necessary. We know the importance of access. We know the importance of, say, abiding by, being bound by international humanitarian law, as well as other legal instruments that are, endorsed by everybody, including the Sudanese, and so act on that. However, the revolution in 2018, 2019 put the people of the Sudan at the center of their own future. The coup first, later the war has been a terrible setback. However, they still, they have not given up, as I said. There is still power in that sentiment, that revolution, and we have an obligation politically, but I would also argue moral, even though it's diplomats don't need to talk about morality, but I like to do it. We have an obligation to support this, and we have also discussed here concrete actions for how to overcome the current crisis, so that the Sudanese people, the country, can return back to the path of freedom, peace, and justice. Huria, Salam, Adala. So with that, thank you so much for inviting me, and I wish you good luck. And then continued good deliberations. Very much apologies for signing off now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, and thank you for this lovely words in Arabic, which is also global slogans now. And thank you for joining us. And I could see Mr. Martin Plaut was raising his hand. Sorry for keeping you waiting, but now...
Please, don't worry. I'm very pleased that we were able to take Professor Stiansen's remarks. They were very helpful. One thing I would, I don't really buy into is this idea of, if there's a split, there'll be a forever war. I remember the same remarks being made in relation to Sudan and South Sudan when it was the SPLA was fighting for its independence, and it went on, and South Sudan broke away. It hasn't become a great success, but goodness me, it hasn't produced a forever war in Sudan, that's for sure. And between Sudan and South Sudan, there hasn't been a war. So I think we can overemphasize this, and the idea that that Aicha was making about a regional war. Well, I'm not convinced about that either. Is it going to engulf the whole of the Horn of Africa? I don't think so. I think these things, Sudan is big enough for its own, major wars. And let's not forget one thing, which is that both sides, the RSF and SAF, were agreed on one thing before they disagreed. And that was that there would not be democracy in Sudan. The civil organizations, which were powerful, well-organized, and really effective organizations, were pushed aside, were crushed, and that was the one thing that both the generals agreed on. They then fell out about the spoils, about who's going to run the country, but the path towards a real resolution in Sudan, I mean, how on earth if both sides agree that there was not going to be a democracy, well, then where are we going? How are we going to move forward? As for the African unions and the international community's role in resolving these issues, I mean, I can't tell you how deeply pessimistic I am. And it's not because I don't want them to be like this. I would love them to be resolved. But the idea of a fact-finding mission that would then discover the things that everyone else knows already, and what would they do with this report? Where would it go? Who would act on it? I mean, that is the real question, is not the facts, but who's going to do anything about it, even if all of these facts are put on the table. Let me give you one example about that. In 2023, the UN Special Rapporteur wrote a report to the United Nations saying that there were 200,000 enslaved people in Mali. I'm not talking about modern slavery. I'm talking about chattel slavery, people who are owned and sold and bought. Has this produced any result? Not a bit of it. Absolutely not. So it's not for lack of facts that there's no action. The problem in the end is a lack of will and determination by the international community. I mean, my own original country, South Africa, was happy to have Omar al-Bashir visit and Hameti, and they were received at a high level. These people who are criminals. So, why, if they're not prepared to take these things seriously, and South Africa has a good judicial system, even if it doesn't work very well. I mean, it doesn't work very rapidly, but has a good constitution, good judicial system. Well, then what is the hope in all of this? I'm afraid, I hate to say it, but what I fear and is most likely to happen is continuing war, continuing suffering until some kind of breakthrough on the battlefield. That is where this is going to be settled, not in negotiations, but in the battlefield. And one side or other, with or without sufficient outside support, will go on fighting, and somebody is going to win. And then maybe we'll have some kind of peace. But whether it will be a peace that leads to democracy is a very different question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. And who wants to wrap up his insight with some comments or answering the question we have posed earlier? Mr. Tim, go ahead.
Thank you very much. The fundamental issues in Sudan for about the last 7 years have been, as Martin correctly pointed out, within the Sudanese armed forces and militias. And the great failure of the effort that got rid of Omar Bashir and created the coalition government, in which Mr. Hamdok failed, was one, those negotiations and talks did not deal with either the role of the military in Sudan's economy. They did not deal with accountability for the grievous violations of human rights that the military and the militias had been responsible for. They created a coalition that papered things over. They failed to produce the structure under which the militias would be integrated into the armed forces, because no country can have two equal militaries. And indeed, in Sudan, we have seen the result of that failure was the coup of 2 years ago and the continued fighting that is going on with the support of any number of outside players. Now, that's point one. Point two, as an American, I'm of course obligated to talk about the Trump administration. It is a transactional administration. And you will all recall that in the first Trump administration, the transaction was that Burhan recognized Israel and the United States ended its economic sanctions against Sudan. So what is the deal that might be made now? And as you have perhaps guessed from my initial comments in this webinar, I'm looking at things that might be done. I'm not looking at an end state because, like Martin, I don't see an end state likely in anything like the near future. A possible solution would be for Mr. Burhan to finally decide to send an ambassador to Israel. What would the Trump administration do in return for that? Well, now, frankly, I think the situation in Gaza will keep Burhan from doing anything like that. But that's the sort of thing that I believe is open to be done at this point. Not a full solution, not cosmic negotiations. Yes, I like Aicha's view about the Quad and the potential for pushing things forward here, But part of that push has to be to bring the Emirates back into the international community view of what should happen in Sudan. That's a little bit discombobulated, but thanks again.
Thank you very much. And I can see Mr. Adam Gaye is raising his hand. Mr. Adam.
Yes, thank you. Very quickly, I truly like all the this conversation, and I share the realistic, pragmatic view of Martin about the fact that all these fact-finding missions, those reports end up without any action to follow up on that. And yes, what he said about Mali, the slavery in Mali, you have it in Mauritania, but also you have people, individuals, freedom fighters, people who speak about their countries, not being given a chance to speak within Africa. And I personally, I live it, I see it, I know that really, if anything happens to any African, gone is the time when maybe 30 years ago, somebody like Mandela from his jail would hear the support from the international community. This doesn't seem to exist in this cynicism that we witness in this global arena today. Yet, despite all this situation, I believe, like we say, I remember one of my professors at Oxford said, in the middle of the darkness, try to lit up a candle. We got to do something, at least to bring this question to be heard, listened, and known. And it's easy. I think, I don't know who is ready to sponsor that, but at least to finance something to make this information present on the internet network, to be discussed in the academics, in the African media, and down the line to force even maybe the African Union to put it as a topic to discuss. And take it also, I remember, like I said, about John Garang. He had a godfather in Mickey Leland at the US Congress, so that to bring it place the Trump administration, maybe somebody with enough, we got to take also into account the African conflicts. The world is not just about Ukraine, it's not just about those conflicts like China, the Taiwan Strait, etc., but also Africa. And we African, we have a role to play. Can we be part of it? Can we be involved in it? Can we be called to maintain the flame of the conversation on this? I think this is not very expensive a request. It is something that some of the Africans who still have the capacity to attend places, whether they talk on media platform and other academics and other diplomatic circles, to at least remind the world that Sudan indeed matters. I think this is something that is possible. It's not just fixing the problem. It will be a war, an all-out war, and the winner may decide down the line. We have seen it in Afghanistan, where even the Trump administration accepted to do a deal with the Taliban. Maybe that's the kind of thing that we will end up accepting as the new normal in the 21st century cynical circumstances that we live in. But at least we still have people who are dreaming of a better Africa, and those people should be brought to the fore and talk about this. I think I'm not daydreaming. I think we've done it. We've been there when we fought for independence of the Southern African nation. We were there when Mandela was freed, and I think this is not something that is not impossible. After all, this Trump-dominated, realistic approach of international affairs is not something that has been always there since the global era we know after the Second World War. I think truly
Thank you very
we
much,
have to give a chance
Mr.
to
Adam.
that. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Adama, for this. And before we come to the end of this webinar, so I think all our guests have just 1 minute to have a final word. So who will go ahead first? Just in 1 minute. This is
I
Aicha.
can. Yes.
Go ahead.
Well,
1 minute.
I would like to conclude by going back to the worst scenario, unfortunately, that Mr. Plaut oversee, which is letting the war go on. What would happen? What would happen is simple disintegration of Sudan, not into two states or state projects, one under the RSF, another under the SAF, but probably in 2, 3, or 4. Let's not forget that in Eastern Sudan, you have some separatists that have already threatened to break away. And quite recently, some militias that have been created by the government in northern Sudan, in some parts in Halfa and other areas that were that have been quite peaceful so far. So I think disintegrating the Sudan, the state of Sudan, is a major danger, not only for Sudan, but for other states or failed states in the region, the Arab region in particular. We don't need more failed states. We've seen the case of South Sudan and many other, states that haven't been prepared, that don't have the capacity to run the governance of their states. So this is a major issue. The second point, very briefly, is about the SAF, Sudanese Armed Forces. I think they are the main cause of what happened to Sudan so far. They have ruled the country for over 60 years. They don't have the intention to give up. And they have their major problem, the problem is that they haven't fulfilled the state role, which is upholding legitimate violence through legitimate means in running the state business. They have been counting on militias, and they haven't learned the lesson from RSF. They're still creating more militias, which is unfortunately might take Sudan to another worse situation, which I don't hope, of course. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aicha. And in 1 minute, Mr. Timothy.
Thank you. It won't take a minute. Diplomacy must continue. Efforts by the Gulf nations, the US, Norway, the UK, must all continue. Saudi Arabia is a key player. Egypt is another key player. We know the Emirates have to be brought back into the fold. That's got to be a priority for what foreigners can do. At the same time, on the Sudanese side, there needs to be a realization, and I don't know how that can be brought to happen, that what they are doing now is self-defeating, if not, and indeed absolutely wrong, morally, ethically, and for the future of their own country. How that can be brought to happen, perhaps as a result of the Muslim clergy playing a major role, I don't know, but that's vital. And finally, yes, while the Africa Union is perhaps not the strongest reed, IGAD has from time to time made exactly the right noises about the situation in Sudan, including at one point threatening a possible military intervention. That obviously didn't go anywhere, but it has happened in that region before. Tanzania did invade Uganda twice, as I recall. So things might be going forward. It's going to be slow, very slow, and fighting will continue.
Thank you very much. Yes, and for Mrs. Leni Kienzle, your final word.
Thanks so much. So I would just like to conclude by saying that the only solution for the humanitarian crisis and to prevent famine from spreading and to address the famine that is ongoing is an end to the conflict. But in whatever scenarios do play out, no matter what, as WFP and humanitarian organizations, we will continue to stand by the side of the Sudanese people. and deliver for the Sudanese people as much as possible and continue to try to find ways to overcome the operational challenges that we see on the ground. And for that, we really need the support of diplomatic support of our donors and partners, and on the political level, to push first for unfettered humanitarian access, specifically humanitarian pause for the besieged cities of El-Fasher and Kadugli, but in the long term, an end to the conflict. But regardless of what comes, we will stay, we will deliver. We've been working in Sudan since 1963 throughout multiple crises, and we will stay there. But we need all the support that we can get on the diplomatic front to be able to do that and to have the humanitarian space to save lives. And we won't give up, even if it's difficult, if it's tough, we won't give up. So that's what I want to end with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patson. Malisa, your minute.
Thank you very much. What I would advocate for is a bit more moderation in how we look at the situation. Africa is 70, close to 80 years into independence. And so if you were to look at the state of affairs, whether it be the unification of the African Union or the establishment thereof, the establishment of the regional organizations from, SADC to IGAD, these are all things that if you're to look in the global context of the development of humanity, we're quite far ahead in terms of what can be done if indeed people put their best foot forward. Does it mean that it's perfect? No. Does it mean that it's succeeding at 100%? No. However, to immediately then simply put aside the African Union, put aside IGAD, put aside the East African community, that would be very amiss. I mean, we went into a world war last century as a result of countries that were hundreds of years old, and we are dealing with one country at the moment. So I think it's very essential that from a place of putting together a strong civil society voice, whether it be from the African space or within the international community, this will be a very essential part. And that's why I am very glad that we're part of this conversation, civil society interacting with diplomacy in order to bring about a wholesome approach to solving the issues in the Sudan. And one last thing from me would be that the African Union currently, its budget is 58% funded by international partners. So that means that for that engine to keep running, there needs to be a stronger terms of resolution that come from the partners that do fund the African Union, whether it be Norway, whether it be Germany, the United States, especially when it comes to the Peace and Security Department and the Peace Security Council. We cannot simply fund these organizations, see that they're not working, and continue to give them the same amounts and increment them based on inflation, and then turn back and then say, why are you not working? At the end of the day, this is something that needs to be a matter of constant dialogue. But for me, what I would say is let the African Union and let the United Nations working together with state parties see a new resolve to see Sudan achieve peace. It's been done before, and I believe it can be done again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Adama Gaye, your final word, please, in 1 minute.
Okay, less than a minute. I recall 1997 or 96, I was on the plane of the Secretary General of the UN, Kofi Annan. We were flying over Sudan and we were forced to land in Khartoum. At the time, there was a sanction against Sudan that made literally the country open again to the international community because the Sudanese sent their Minister of Foreign Affairs to welcome us at the airport. What I'm trying to say here, a slight thing can make a small thing can make a difference. So 3 points I believe can be used from my standpoint, in addition to all the other aspects that you mentioned. First, recall Ethiopia. It was "We Are the World," the song that was done that showed the interest of the international community about the famine over there. Why can't we try to find a musician, artist, and from Africa or outside of Africa? It can be African or international, to think about and talk about this conflict, lend their voice to it. Second, I'm talking to Martin. Is it not worthy to doing something about the journalists, young journalists, to ask them, since they are very smart in terms of using the digital route, to do a competition about the suffering of the people of Sudan and why it should be addressed. At least something will come from an African groupings, sharing the views. You can see that is happening. And last but not the least, something like a documentary about Africa and Sudan that should tell the story of this country may be useful to document it and keep it in the mind of the people. Because I don't think that this problem will be fixed overnight, but at least we should do something to maintain it in the long haul. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very good. And to conclude with Mr. Martin Plaut from BBC with his final word and final part of this today's webinar.
Well, what can I say? I find the fact that Tim has to go back to the invasion by Tanzania, goodness me, of Uganda. We have to go a very, very long way back to dig that one up. But you're right, of course. I haven't forgotten it. And of course, we shouldn't forget that it's not just Africa hasn't just been independent for 80 years. Look at Ethiopia. I mean, it goes back centuries. It doesn't mean that it's at peace either. So, and Aicha, I would just say this to you, keeping countries together doesn't necessarily either make them more failed or less failed. It's up to the people to decide. And frankly, the people are very often just represented by warlords who fight the hell out of each other. And that is the reality of where we are. We can't predict where these things are going. I wish Sudan well. I love the country. It's a great people. And finally, I would just take my hat off and really give every support I possibly could to Leni and her colleagues in the WFP. What a fantastic organization. What dedication, what hard work, what strength your people have demonstrated year after year after year, fighting for people to stay alive. You are the people who really deserve the credit more than almost anybody else.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Martin, for your nice words. And at the end of this valuable webinar, I would like to thank each and every one of you who has taken part in it, either by speaking, commenting, or listening. Thank you very much for your precious time and contribution, and have a good day.